It's hard not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of green promises we get every day. Specifically, the planted tree solution has become sort of a shorthand for fixing the climate crisis. We're constantly being fed images of saplings and soaring timber as the ultimate symbol of restoration. It's intuitive, it's visual, and it feels like a complete answer. And it's appealing in part because it lets us feel like the solution is someplace else and planted by someone else, while our everyday life continues unchanged. So instead of adding to the noise of global tree counts, I wanted to look further down. I want to focus on the organisms that are literally under our feet or hidden in the swamp. Organisms that, biologically speaking, are doing a job that trees simply can't match. In this video, we're looking at moss and mangroves. These two systems represent the unsung infrastructure of the planet. Infrastructure is the right word here, because just like roads or pipes or power lines, these systems support our daily life. We don't notice them when they work, only when they fail. On the one hand, you have the coastal defense, the mangrove forests that straddle the line between land and sea. On the other hand, you have the ancient ground cover, mosses and peatlands. While they look incredibly different, they do share a superpower. They are high-density storage units that operate on a completely different level of efficiency than a standard forest. What really matters here and what is the most fascinating is a mechanism called arrested decay. In the normal forests, leaves fall, rot, and release their carbon relatively quickly back into the air. But mangroves and mosses hack the system. Mangroves trap carbon in waterlogged, oxygen-poor or anoxic mud, which stops bacteria from breaking it down. Mosses, specifically in peatlands, do something slightly different. They create acidic, wet conditions that preserve organic matter for thousands of years. They don't just hold carbon, they entomb it. And every ton of carbon that stays entombed is one that doesn't add pressure to heat waves, food prices, insurance costs, or energy systems that already feel stretched. And the numbers for this are staggering. Research indicates that mangroves can bury carbon at a rate 3 to 10 times faster than terrestrial forests. We see this, for instance, in the Solomon Islands, where the locals realized that their village wasn't just losing wood through deforestation of mangroves, but they were losing the very land that the village was built on, the land that the mangroves had held onto. By replanting the mangroves, the village wasn't just planting trees, they were rebuilding the soil bank. And similarly, the humble moss is a particulate vacuum. Studies show that moss captures 4 times more particulate matter from the air than tree leaves. It is a tiny ancient filter that has been scrubbing the atmosphere for 400 million years. Okay, stay with me here because this is where things get complicated. Because these systems rely on soil chemistry and water levels to store carbon, they are incredibly fragile. You can replant a pine forest fairly easily, but you cannot easily rebuild a peat bog or a mangrove sediment layer once it's been drained or dredged. When we destroy these areas, we aren't just cutting down plants. We are breaking the seal of a carbon wall that has been locked for millennia. And by doing so, we're also increasing future costs that tend to land far from the place of destruction. And that means higher costs for disaster spending, in disrupted food systems, and communities adapting to risks that they didn't create. And we can see this distinction quite clearly if we look through the lens of time. A tree stores carbon for its lifetime, maybe 100 years, before releasing it through its death or through fire, for instance. But a moss in a peatland is storing carbon on a geological time span. Peatlands operate on a timescale that outlasts generations. And that means that the consequences of damaging them will be felt by people who never consented to the trade. To put it differently, it's the difference between a checking account where money keeps flowing in and out and a deep savings bond that just sits there, compounding forever. We often obsess over the checkings account while ignoring the savings bond. But this isn't a topic that's easy to sell because mud and swamp don't look good on a brochure. It's much harder to market the preservation of a bog than the planting of a majestic redwood. These ecosystems are often seen as wastelands, areas to be drained for agriculture or cleared for coastal views. Our aesthetic barrier to swampy things is actually a major barrier to climate progress. Now, most people will never visit a bog or walk through a mangrove forest. So it's reasonable to ask why this should matter in your daily life, filled with work, family, rent, and trying to stay afloat. The answer is that exactly these ecosystems reduce the number of shocks that reach into our daily lives. Mangroves soften storms before they become floods in living rooms. They reduce coastal erosion that would otherwise threaten homes, roads, and ports. The same ports that food and energy move through. When mangroves disappear, those risks don't vanish. They reappear as higher insurance premiums, disrupted supply chains, and public money diverted into constant repairs. Peatlands and mosses operate further upstream, but their role is just as important. They stabilize water systems, reducing flooding far beyond their borders. They lock away carbon that would otherwise intensify heat waves, strain energy grids, and push food prices higher. And when peatlands are drained, the emissions reduced don't stay local. They enter the same atmosphere that shapes everyone's daily conditions. So for everyday people, this isn't about becoming climate heroes. It's about recognizing that a large part of what keeps daily life manageable depends on systems we rarely see but constantly depend on. This matters because it forces us to rethink what restoration actually means. It suggests that some of our best options for restoration might not necessarily be planting new things, although these have a role. One of our best strategies might lie in fiercely protecting the old, wet and muddy things. Because it turns out that moss, the organism that gave Earth its first breath of oxygen, might still be the most sophisticated natural technology that we currently have. Okay, so this doesn't mean that everybody has to go and save a swamp. But it does change what meaningful action can look like. At the minimum, it means being skeptical of climate solutions that focus on what's visible and easy to market. Tree planting campaigns can be helpful by all means, but only when they don't distract from protecting ecosystems that cannot be rebuilt once they're lost. And meaningful actions can also mean supporting policies and local decisions that protect wetlands, peatlands, and coastal ecosystems, even when they aren't visually impressive, or especially when they aren't. And it means adjusting our own sense of contribution. Not everything valuable involves doing more. Sometimes the most effective climate action is to prevent damage that would take centuries to undo. I'd be interested to hear your take on this. Do you think we rely too much on the visual appeal of trees and miss the value of these uglier ecosystems? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for joining me today. See you again soon.